welcome, Peter.
Thank
Peter
you,
Khalil,
Ethan.
to the... Yeah, sorry, we've gone live. We've started now. I guess before we get into it, I just want to... This could be a good segue. I've had a bit of an accident-prone week. I've cut my finger. I've bumped my nose, just to clarify.
Yeah, you look pretty
what that is.
banged up.
Yeah, I've bumped my knee. Thankfully, I got pants on, and so you can't see my knee. But bit of a dangerous week, and which leads me to seeing your Instagram. And there was something very dangerous on there.
Really?
You had a big pair of guns just recently, one of your Instagram posts.
Yeah.
Where you were lifting the weights.
Are you talking about my arms?
Yeah, your arms.
Yes,
Yeah.
I was lifting the weights. But then my staff very cheekily spliced in an earlier uncut version of me saying it's 7.5 kilo. And they're like, yeah, what a big man.
Yeah.
Wasn't very heavy.
No. But
the point was...
Yes, there we go. Perfect segue. There we go.
I was counting the number of new homes. It was 1,275 new homes, affordable and social homes that we'd just ticked off for Victoria.
Yes.
Additional, just this morning.
That
morning. Yeah.
Exciting. I just thought it was a good because I try to start off by finding something fun on the Instagram, and then that just popped up perfectly. And
well, I'm a bit old, right? So people think it's dad jokes. The jokes aren't really funny. I don't know. Do you reckon it was funny?
I thought it was funny.
I think so.
Yeah. Are they putting you into a shoebox or something
at the start of this podcast?
No. Maybe I have a sense of...
It was my idea. Do you remember Anchorman when Ron Burgundy was lifting weights in his office in the nude? I didn't take my top off. And he's feel the burn. And he was like 11,342. Oh, I didn't see you there, Miss Corningstone.
Hello. Let me tell you about the housing.
Yeah.
I thought it was a fun post.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
And then because I recently...
I'm glad I've got the approval of a millennial.
Yeah.
Are you a millennial?
Yeah, 94. So
okay, that is millennial.
Yeah, pretty apparently.
I'm Gen X.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're the sandwich generation apparently, like we're kids
middle ground of
parents.
Oh, yeah.
Look after both of them. You'll get there.
One day. I'm thinking about it, talking with the missus.
Yeah.
With the kids and that. But yeah, I thought, the public housing thing is that, I guess was that something, take us back to give some backstory or
context,
I guess.
Context.
Because some of your upbringing, I think, from what I read, is you're a child of migrant parents.
Yep.
And then there was, parts of your childhood in housing commissions, public housing and stuff like that. So that is very important in some aspect to you.
Your upbringing and your environment that you grow up in does really shape you in many ways. And so, my parents migrated from Egypt in 1970 separately, and they met here actually. And they were fleeing persecution. Yeah. Obviously, there were wars in Egypt and in the Middle East and North Africa region, and they were seeking a better life. And Dad, particularly, who's passed away now, but he was like fleeing sort of some of the kind of internal repression that was happening in the regime at the time. Yeah. He was speaking out against some of that and had to kind of leave to the sort of furthest point on the planet, from Cairo, probably Melbourne,
from anywhere in Australia.
So as new migrants, we got the opportunity to get a roof over our heads through public housing, a housing commission, it's called here in Victoria. Back then in the 70s, public housing was about 6-7% of total housing stock. Fast forward decades later, and it's like less than 2%. And so this is why it's so important for us to try and build social and affordable and public housing, which we've invested in as a government. And anyway, to go back to the personal, it did personally shape me because it gave us the kind of basic dignity of a roof over our heads. That, like, my parents were working hard, and that housing was a form of, it was a base of dignity, if you like.
Yeah, it helps meet that like basic need.
Yeah, not to say it wasn't easy. It was rough, but whatever. But the point is, it was there, and it gave you kind of a baseline, and then education was the other bit that was really important. Access to education, access to housing, access to education.
Those foundational,
absolutely. And I think because of governments that put that in place over decades, we got that opportunity to have a home and also to get a quality education. And so it made a big difference. And this is why I think it's so important, especially with the demand for housing, particularly for younger people, but also for older, particularly women over 55. That was one of the biggest demographics of people women becoming homeless.
I've heard that recently.
Homelessness. We're addressing a lot of that. In the first term of government, there was like $40 billion investment in social, affordable and public housing, and carve-outs for women over a certain age who are experiencing homelessness, carve-outs for people families and women, kids experiencing domestic violence, but also building homes. Here's the thing, though, Ethan. People don't want to live in a housing commission. Let's just be straight up about it.
Because of the stigma or something?
There's a stigmatisation of it. I mean, we joke around and say we're a houser and so on. Public housing is very, very important.
Yeah.
But I think if you're in public housing, you then want to, like my parents worked hard, they saved up, and then we moved out of the public housing and they got their own place. I mean, back then you could do that because the median...
A lot more affordable.
The median income was what? Well, median house price was, the average house price was about three times the median income. Now it's like 12 times.
Yeah.
Like, so it's really hard for young people across the community to actually save for a deposit and to get in. So that's why we've invested in first home buyers, guarantee schemes, shared equity, helping people to get their deposit together, allocating 100,000 new homes to be built just for first home buyers so they don't have to compete with cashed up investors or whatever it might be.
Bit of a threat, those guys. Yeah.
And then in the rental as well, in the rental space too, the lack of rental properties. So we're building affordable rentals, build to rent, and these are sustainable. They're environmentally friendly. They're modern, and the quality is really high. And that's really important because people want to live, particularly if you're working near hospital. If you're a nurse or you're AMBO or you're police or you're whatever, you or teacher or a childcare worker, you need to be working close to where you work rather than spending 3 hours on a commute.
It can be disheartening having to spend that long travelling.
So that's the kind of basis of building that affordable homes for people to get into. But the fact is, it doesn't happen overnight. Like it takes a while
time
to build,
yeah.
and there's a lot of pressures on the housing market, obviously with materials and imports going up and the costs and so on. So we are investing in housing because it is a generational issue. It is for people's kind of baseline that I was talking about. It's so critically important.
Yeah. Including, I think, the free TAFE, all the TAFE and free construction, there was a $10,000 grant or something for
Well, I mean,
stuff like that.
The other side of this is the education side, which is providing opportunities for apprentices to work in that space because we need more skills in building and construction. So we're incentivising it.
Boat builder, I can my day job, boat builder. So I can get that. Yeah, trades are very important.
You're in demand.
Yes. Apparently, there's a lot of ocean. So
you know how you got banged up? That wasn't on a building site or anything.
No, that was at my shed at work. Yeah,
it was your shed at work.
I can't really claim anything.
Did you have a fight with your tools? Did you?
No, I stupidly just pulled a cord out of the wall and it's flung up and bumped me in the nose.
Well, it's not too bad. Are people watching this or listening to this?
However they want to consume it.
If they're listening, it's just like a little red mark on Ethan's nose. Looks like he got in a bit of a scrap.
Well, no, that's exactly what happened. There was no scrap. It was just a cord and me just had a disagreement.
Wow. Okay.
But no, so I should have gone to an urgent care clinic.
You should have.
There we go. But
this guy's good. He's segueing into all these policy areas very naturally. You did your research.
I try to. But yeah, so for those who don't know yet, I'm here with Peter Khalil, the member for Wills, the federal member for Wills. And also Assistant Defence Minister, which is a first-time portfolio sort of thing that you've received.
Yes, it's a great honour to be given that opportunity.
We might, if we get a chance, we'll talk a bit more about it later. What's that like, receiving a portfolio, what's involved, and trying to get up to speed and all of everything, all of it. That's a rough introduction I've done. How would you best introduce yourself?
Who I am?
Yeah.
That's kind of the perennial question is, who are you?
It is a tricky one.
What do you stand for?
Yeah.
Look, I think, you have multiple identities as a person, and I think the great thing about being Australian is that you can keep your heritage, your cultural heritage. I'm proud to be of Egyptian background. I have that cultural background and pride in being of Egyptian ethnicity. I'm from Melbourne, from Victoria, love the Collingwood Footy Club.
There you go. Got the colours on. He's got the colours on for listeners.
A dad, husband, someone who cares about community and who works. I got into politics because I thought I could make a difference. I know it sounds a bit cliche, doesn't it? I can make a difference in people's lives, but you can despite the cynicism in politics, you can make a huge difference in people's lives.
Especially in this country.
Yeah, as a local MP, you can. I mean, our whole number one priority is to serve the community and to support people who are in need, the vulnerable, those who have issues that they need sorted. So we do that every day, and I think that's a great gives you a great sense of satisfaction and purpose in helping people. So you can do it at the local level, which we've been doing, but you can also do it at the national level, and this is where getting into government and political power is really important because it's how you use that power.
I think Anthony was mentioning something like that last interview. It helps to be a part of a government in power.
Yes, because you can actually deliver outcomes rather than just talk about it. There's a place for civic society. There's a place for advocacy. There's a place for even for me as an MP to do advocacy on issues as well, particularly internally. You can do that. You can shape policies within a political party that it's a party of government that can form government. Yeah. And a perfect example of that is, I'm very passionate about refugee and asylum seeker policy and making changes to that. And in opposition, I pushed really hard and I actually moved the motion at the party conference, the big national party conference, to get rid of TPVs and Chevs and to double our refugee intake. This is an effort by a number of MPs. So that changed policy, and in our first term, we removed 19,000 temporary protection visas and gave 19,000 refugees permanent residency and citizenship.
Life changing.
So that's real. It can actually happen. And you can do that at the national level with big national policies. You can do it as part of the executive, frankly, when you're in government. And I think that's the important thing to note about political power. I've been drawn to that because how do you use it? What do you do with it? How does it make a difference to people's lives on an individual basis, but also societal change and national change? And I'm also very interested in our place in the world, Australia as a global citizen. So these are all big things about who I am or what I'm passionate about or focused on. But, how do you define yourself? It's so hard. You are many, many things as a person, and every individual is so complex and has so many experiences and so many memories, and the being a human being and part of that broader society and the social element of who we are, family and friends and all this kind of stuff is so important to me as well. But I definitely think the way my parents raised me to give something back to Australia is kind of what drove me to public service, particularly. Yeah,
I read that in your opening
speech that I did. They
way back in 2016.
Well, they said, everyone says Australia's a lucky country, but we're actually the lucky ones to be Australian, and make sure you give something back to the country that's given us such a great opportunity. Now, what I later discovered was quite remarkable about what they were trying to teach us and guide us on that, my sister and I, was that even while he was saying this, Dad, for example, was experiencing a lot of prejudice at work, racism, discrimination, and yet was still saying to me, Australia, despite what he was experiencing, that there is opportunity here for a better life, and that we are getting that better life, and there are many people who are embracing us and giving us this opportunity. And I thought that was quite remarkable to be able to do that, even though, because you can become bitter, and I experienced discrimination, I experienced racism, and I experienced prejudice growing up. You can see easily how you can become quite bitter about that, feel like you don't belong.
Constantly getting pushed every day.
Yeah, belonging is a really important part of it. So it took me a while to figure out what it means to be an Australian and who am I and how am I placed within Australian society.
Yeah.
And for me, the kind of multicultural, multi-faith, ethnic society that we have, which we built up over decades.
Yeah, hard work, and it's not
unique.
Yeah.
And unique in the sense that it didn't happen by magic.
No.
Like people committed to it, made a generational commitment to it over decades.
Yeah.
And it works because of that.
Something I love about Australia.
Yeah, and even if we disagree with each other and we have this deep difference and division about issues, which we should do or have done, that's okay. As long as you're able to navigate that in a respectful and peaceful way, because you're committed to that broader whole, the fabric of that the plurality that we have.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I strayed off who I am, but I think that kind of explains what my thinking is and what drives me. Is to make change and to help people and to make our life and the quality of life and the equality of opportunity that people have. And the Labor Party for me is the one that has the values around that, a social democratic party that seeks to give people the opportunity to fulfill their potential by investing in education, in healthcare, in housing. These
to improve the
things.
chances of equal opportunity.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you shouldn't be held back because of your socioeconomic status. You shouldn't be held back because of your ethnic background or your faith background or your no faith or your gender or your sexuality.
Yeah.
There is that kind of equality of opportunity there. Doesn't mean everyone has the same levels of skill or whatever, but you want people to fulfill their potential to the max.
Yeah. Love that about the Australian experiment.
Yes.
Yeah. So going back a bit, I guess, what was life like before you entered the world of politics?
Oh, like how back do you want to go?
Well, anything that you feel is relevant to where you are now, I guess.
Oh, I think I touched on the fact that I was sort of taught by my parents to get a good education because they're like, make sure you get a really good education.
Yeah.
And then, you can do whatever you want.
And I remember reading there was, some mentors along the way as well you've had.
Yeah, a few people.
Dake or Dak or...
Who's Dak?
I don't know. Maybe I'm misreading it.
Well, your research has gone out the window now.
Oh, well, Mr. Sestito.
Mr. Sestito.
Yeah, that one. And then
you have done
that was the
research.
teacher. And then there was also a guy who ran a fish and chip shop or something, wasn't there?
No, that's not true. Although I do frequent a lot of fish and chip shops.
All right, never mind.
But by my Year 9 politics teacher, that's funny you should mention that because this relates to the education side of things. But the Year 9 politics, you can edit this out, right? Can't you? Edit all the bad bits of you.
That's actually most of the editing. Most of the editing is just me going, yeah.
No, my Year 9 politics teacher, he was amazing. So he was very passionate about Labor and politics. It was 1987, so in the middle of the Hawke era. Hawke Government, and he kind of instilled that kind of passion for Australian politics as I learnt it, in class and stuff. Anyway, fast forward 40 years later or 35, whatever it is, years later, 2008, whatever it was, and I'm working as the foreign policy advisor for Kevin Rudd.
Yep.
And the first thing I did, the first day in the Prime Minister's office after we won the election, I was actually 2007 in November, I said to my EA, and I hadn't spoken to him since 1987, and I said, what's that? That's 25, 30 years. Yeah. And I said, can you call up the school and ask for Mr. Ray Sestito, my Year 9, I think he was still working.
Wow, yeah.
So because he was such a political tragic, the fact that he got a call from the Prime Minister's office in and of itself was a kind of a great thing. And so he gets called to the staff room, Mr. Sestito, it's the Prime Minister's office in Australia calling you, So he comes to the phone and he's all excited. And I said, Mr. Sestito, it's me, it's Peter. He goes, just call me Ray. I'm like, no, I can't do that. It's too embarrassing. And they call me Mr. Sestito. And he goes, I've been following your career and you've done well and so on.
Wow.
And I said, look, I just want to say two things to you. I said, first, I want to just apologise for being such a, mischievous, that's an understatement. That's a terror in Year 9.
Youth, yeah. We all are at some aspect.
And I think I gave you that little nervous tick that, that you have. But he laughed. And then I said, but seriously, I also want to thank you because I wouldn't be here in the PM's office if it wasn't for your passion and your teaching of Australian politics and how you instilled that passion in me. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it went all quiet. I think there was a tear or two and I had one. But that is the power of education. That is the power of great teachers who can guide you and open the world to you in different ways. I had many teachers like that who opened up many areas that
adjust
you
your perspective on things and how to
widen the aperture, right? And just give you a sense of the world that you wouldn't have otherwise seen.
Yeah. What are some of the lessons, I guess, or what's the top one that you remember from him in particular? If there's anything too narrow.
Look, I think it was really about how the Hawke government ran and Hawke particularly ran a consensus type government. He was so confident in his abilities, obviously, but he had so many talented people in his ministry and his cabinet, and their courage in taking on big reforms to make change, but also taking people with them, the way that they demonstrate that leadership. And later, I met Bob, obviously, Bob Hawke.
In behind there.
Yeah, he's sitting there, yeah. Oh, he's standing there. I was shaking hands with him in that photo. But I got to spend a bit of time with him. Now, he was my predecessor, one of my predecessors in the seat of Wills, member of Wills. And I remember saying to Bob, we'd sit there at his place and we'd talk foreign policy. But in one of the meetings I had with him, I was like, what is the one thing that you did in your government that you're super proud of and you rate the highest, but it hasn't really been talked about that much? And he said, well, we put all these – when I started in 1983, he said – I won't do the Bob thing. When I started in 1983. Well, and he said, when I started – and about 30% of students finished year 12 or did what they was called matriculation at that time, get through HSC and BCE. And he goes, because of the policies that we put in place, by the time I finished as PM, it was up to high 80%, like almost 90%, 88% or something.
Impressive change.
And that's kind of significant because if you think about it, the way
that's a 10-year period.
Yeah. Students would go out literally at year 10 and go and work at the Commonwealth Bank as a teller.
Really?
Yes, this is what used to happen.
Yeah, okay.
Like there was no people could finish year 10 or 11 and just go and get a job.
Yeah.
Even in the sort of what you'd call white collar. So it wasn't just students leaving high school to go and
do a trade or
a trade
job
or whatever. There was just all these other jobs that you did that you didn't require the end of high school. Kind of basic kind of administrative jobs and things like that.
And they're running the world today.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, well, I think it's a good thing to get students to finish high school. It gives them the opportunity then to go into a trade or to go to TAFE or to go to uni or whatever. Not everyone's going to do the same thing. But, that lift on education, I think, has made a difference to Australia, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, no, it is a big deal.
Well, did you finish year 12?
Yeah.
Well, why do you say it? Like, I don't know. Like maybe you could have left at year 11 and gone and be a tradie.
I could have. I should have. Maybe I shouldn't have. I don't know. It was something instilled because my mother, she was a child of the Hawke era in that. She was born in 75.
Yeah.
She didn't finish school. And then all the lessons she's had from, how difficult it can be to get a job.
Because she didn't finish school.
Because she didn't finish school. Yeah. And so that was instilled in me. So I was like, you make sure you bloody finish.
School. Exactly. Yeah.
So got through it, got it done. But it is important. It might not feel like it at the time.
No, but it is important.
Yeah, for the kids listening,
Are there any kids that listen to your podcast?
I don't know.
When you say kids, what do you just?
I don't know. High school. Or
high school.
Kids in general. Kids, I don't know. Teenagers.
You're not that old, Ethan.
I know. I feel old sometimes.
Do you?
Anyway, that's...
I mean, it is a bit of an old man thing to be beaten up by a cord.
Yeah, just like it felt like Mr. Bean sort of thing. One of those little skits of. Anyway, yeah. Thanks for bringing it back.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to remind you.
I guess there was something as well. I read the Australian Honours Service Medal. Are you a recipient of that? I believe.
That was Humanitarian Services Medal. I was posted to Iraq back in 2003.
Yep.
And I worked on rebuilding the public service there, and this is post the Saddam regime being removed. So it was rebuilding the ministries, the Ministry for Defence, the security services, the national security cabinet structures, the ministerial structures, and so on. Just like we're working on trying to rebuild. Basic kind of governance as well. And I did a fair bit of demobilizing militia as well and get them to come into the armed services and the police rather than being separate militias.
Sorry. No, what was the day-to-day experiences or your involvement in that?
Well, I was there for almost about a year. So I was working on that pretty intense. It was pretty intense because it was also in the midst of a war-like situation where there was an insurgency and some of the Iraqi armed forces and security services were in the middle of the fight as well with coalition forces against Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
I think you mentioned sort of disarming people or disarming groups to try and help them participate in building up. So what's it? You walk up and go, hey, give us your guns, or what's
well, it's kind of like that, actually. Yeah. So there are various militias that existed in Iraq at the time. So there was the Kurdish militias, the Peshmerga. There were Shiite militias based around religious groupings. There were Sunni tribal groups everyone had guns, right? Everyone, and it was like all split up and so on. There was a weak centre, a weak government. There was no government anymore because Saddam, the regime had been removed. The army had been dissipated and they was trying to be rebuilt again. So that was so the negotiations were around the militias to say, look, here's the benefits of bringing your forces into a unified Iraqi army or security services as well. So that was challenging because the ethnic differences, and we're talking about ethnic differences and division and disagreement, were pretty deep.
Very deep
so
there,
Sunni versus Shia and Sunni versus Kurd and Shia versus Kurd. It was really, really deep. So ethnically and from a religious point of view, there were these big fractures. It was sectarian divides. So trying to convince them that they could work together again and not split the country, so to speak, up into pieces or divulge into or down into sort of just warring tribes was the challenge.
Yeah,
right?
very a lot of pressure.
And so there was a lot of pressure on that and a lot of work to do that. Look, people talk about Iraq as a basket case. It's still going.
Yeah.
Afghanistan, after 20 years of fighting, the Taliban have returned, which is a great tragedy for the people of Afghanistan, frankly.
Which could have been something happening in Iraq.
It could have been Iraq. I mean, Iraq could have been, it was for a period of time overwhelmed by extremists where ISIS took big chunks of it.
Yeah.
But the Iraqi army and the Iraqi people fought back and pushed them out again.
I've seen some lovely before and after photos recently of Iraq.
Yeah.
And just the improvement, just more construction streets and stuff like that. But everything seems a lot more stable.
It's an interesting thing because it's like they have they have a government. It's messy. There's a democracy. It's really messy. There's issues around corruption. There's issues around all of that. They have an army. They have their security service. They have their police. Well, I found interesting about the Iraqis that I spoke to is that there was a sense of being an Iraqi. Like they could say, yeah, I'm Kurdish or I'm a Sunni or I'm a Shia, but that didn't overwhelm identity. For some it did. That came first. Their religious or their sectarian identity overwhelmed the national identity. But there was always a sense of a national identity, particularly in Baghdad and in some of the urban areas as well. And you had actually a very highly educated population that had been repressed for a long time under the Saddam regime and so on. And just, I mean, for the record, I was, when I came back, I thought that people had asked me about the strategic nature of the invasion of Iraq. I mean, I wasn't supportive of that. I think that the destabilizing of the entire region that flowed from that. But once it had happened, there was a responsibility of the coalition forces who were part of that to help keep the country together and rebuild it and give it the opportunity to be what it can be. And a sort of minor miracle, it's kind of held together so far. I mean, there are problems clearly, but there always will be. So, that was quite the experience and sort of trying to rebuild things. And I just felt it was traumatic as well. Like there were people I work with who got killed. One that I think about a lot still, Ali, he was an interpreter who worked with us. And he was so excited because I was trying to get Sunni, Shia and Kurds to work together. Yeah. And he was half Sunni, half Shia. His mum was Sunni and his dad was Shia, right? So he wanted to see united Iraq. He wanted to see a national identity that went beyond the sectarian identity. And I was trying to get I was actually working on the chaplaincy and trying to get all the different religious leaders, the imams, to support a unified army and be part of the
like a top-down approach sort of thing.
Yeah. And so and he was so excited about that and he was so involved in the work. And then I found out later that he got killed by insurgents for working on this stuff, for working with the coalition, working with us. He was actually beheaded in Iraq, and so many Iraqis gave their lives for a kind of a country that wasn't split by hatred.
There's a lot of sacrifices for this stability.
So many Iraqis died. And so many died in the war as well. During the invasion and so on, and so much suffering that occurred. And that kind of fighting that the Iraqi army did against ISIS, where they pushed them back because they occupied Mosul, they occupied big chunks. They were getting close to Baghdad, and they turned the tide and pushed them back with the help of other countries as well. That counts for something as far as the national identity of the Iraqis. So I hope it holds. I hope they continue to be a messy democracy. All democracy, they say
all democracies are messy in some aspect.
They really are. There's that old saying by a very famous former prime minister in another country who said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others.
Yeah, that's a good one. So with that experience there, what are some of the lessons you've sort of learnt on that period of your life that you maybe utilise today?
I think some of the big lessons from that experience is that the drive, the hatred that drives division that leads to violence, where groups see the other group as the enemy, and all of the degrading of that group, the dehumanizing, and then the violence towards them gets opened up. That is something that I think, I hate to be sort of psychological about this, there's something in human nature where that kind of violence and that hatred can be unleashed towards others on the basis of the difference that is pointed out, the division or the history of back and forward violence against each other, and it just continues in this vicious cycle, right? Breaking that is really hard.
Yeah.
And this, you can apply that kind of thinking to even within our own society. If we disagree about things or we have division about things that are deep, deep rooted, right? How do you navigate that?
Yeah.
And I learned a lot of lessons about how to bring people together despite decades, if not centuries, of hatred between them.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Where do you find? So what things sort of learnt through trial and error is finding the areas of common interest, of common humanity, or the shared humanity that people might have, and trying to bring them together on that. And now sometimes that is transactional because it is a kind of a temporary common objective that might work. Sometimes it goes deeper than that.
Yeah.
It's familial or it could be something else. But that's the key. And I don't want to sound too kind of make this about a moral thing, but it's like in the end you have this constant battle between the hatreds that divide us as human beings and what brings us together and unites us as human beings. And there's a constant struggle about this throughout human history. And how you try and overcome that is what everyone is always trying to do. And we try and overcome it in different ways. So politics is a form of trying to manage that difference.
Really
Democracy is a form of managing that difference in a peaceful manner.
Yeah.
Now, for thousands of years, power would shift through violence. So you don't like the king, let's execute them and you take over. You conquer another land, you massacre all the people. These are what people used to do, still do in some respects. Democracy has tried, I think, to overcome the transition of power through violence to a transition of power that's peaceful.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental difference of it, right?
Yeah. Which is a perfect example of it working. Like a lot of other countries have that history of bloodshed to their formation. Australia is very unique, other than the colonisation part.
Well, but it has it as well.
The foundation of our country. When we federated, it was, hey, king or queen at the time, we would like to run ourselves. So there's, for me at least, from what you're saying, it feels like a good example of doing it without the violence.
Yes, but there was violence against Indigenous Australians.
Obviously, I understand that. I'm not denying that.
The initial violence and colonisation and the injustice, which we are still trying to grapple with and to find reconciliation and justice for Indigenous Australians, First Nations Australians, which is a whole of society and a whole of nation effort. And people have different views about how to do that. Indigenous people and First Nations people have different views about how to do that. Separate from that, the governance principles of how you govern a society are important. The democracies that we talk about, there's not many left on the planet. There's probably about 24 genuine democracies in the world now out of almost 200 countries.
Yeah.
So you have this kind of, and then even in some democracies you're starting to see the illiberal nature of certain things, populism rearing its ugly head, different forms of violence within the democracies, the dissipation of some of the democratic principles that make a democracy. Remember, democracy is not just elections.
No.
It is all of the scaffolding around it, the independence of the judiciary, the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, the care taken to protect minorities and their rights, the economic and social opportunities being afforded to most of the society and not limited to a few. These are all principles that are really important in democracies, and some democracies are by name only, because some of this stuff is being diminished or has been diminished in many respects. And we're always on the guard in Australia, where are we falling down on those democratic principles of governance?
How do we keep holding it up?
Got to keep holding it up. The rule of law, the separation of the executive from the judiciary, all of these things, they sound kind of highfalutin, but they're fundamentally important principles. Yeah. You don't want me as an MP or as a minister being able to have the power to be able to influence a judge, for example. In a case, there has to be a separation of power. You don't want – you need to check power where it exists, so there's a balancing of that power. Once power gets held by a few and concentrated, that's when you start to run in all sorts of trouble because it gets abused.
Yeah.
There's that old saying that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
I don't know if you heard that. I think I mangled that, but I think I got it right.
It's roughly that. Was it absolute power corrupts or something? Yeah, something. Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess at least the Australia itself. Yeah, anyway, sorry. But good point. It is, yeah.
Australia itself is a good example of a democracy that's functioning and working well, and we don't have some of the issues that we're seeing in other parts of the world like the US and parts of Europe, but we always got to be vigilant to that.
Yeah.
So for me, I've been very, very open, publicly very supportive of the right to protest as a fundamental democratic right of every Australian citizen.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of protests on climate change issues, on international conflicts, on whatever it is. People have the right, absolute 100% right guaranteed to protest. It's a democratic right to freely express themselves. As long as it's done peacefully and respectfully and it doesn't cross over into hate speech or attacking others to get your view across. This is where you start to get into a bit of trouble.
You start dipping into that violent side of things,
And then that leads to the dehumanization and then the sort of the violence that flows from that when you start to attack a particular grouping or identity, based on their identity. That starts to diminish.
It makes your argument fall apart, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Heavy talk. Thanks for that.
Sorry.
No, I love it.
Should we go a bit lighter? Should we go back to how you got beaten up by a cord?
Oh, wow. All right. Thanks for embarrassing. No. You've had the experiences overseas with that. Then you've been a part of advisory role for the Kevin Rudd government. Then what made you, during that period in between, what made you want to step up and be a part of the federal parliament?
So it's a big question. So
it is. So what sort of
what drove me to go into politics was it was an iterative process, to use that term. It was like a evolution, if you like.
Yeah.
I did a lot of work in the public sector and the private sector. I worked in Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade as a public servant, Department of Defence, Department of Agriculture. I worked in think tanks, Brookings, which is a think tank in Washington, as an analyst. I worked in academia. I taught at universities. I worked in the private sector, various private sector jobs, corporate jobs, and so on. I did a lot of different things. Worked as an advisor, a national security advisor for Kevin Rudd. So those experiences to me were like, how am I contributing to that initial? Remember I was talking earlier about that initial drive to make a contribution to Australia and give something back. How am I doing that? And I saw politics. So policy making, then politics as an advisor where you're advising the decision maker. And then I thought it was kind of an evolution of like, okay, well, I'm making that contribution, but you really can make an even bigger contribution as a lawmaker if you have the power to be the MP yourself, to exercise that power in the parliamentary space and as a minister and so on. And that's kind of, I think, what the pathway that I took the thinking as I keep evolving to where the political power is and how you use it and where it's used. And so that kind of drove me towards running for office to be the MP that makes the decisions or makes the decisions or influences within my own party that's in government, and then hopefully has an opportunity to be a minister to try and implement or execute some of this stuff. And so that's kind of the path it took, but it wasn't an easy thing. You have to think about this. It's like you make a lot of sacrifices to be in politics. You could go down a sort of a private sector path and have a very different life.
So like on that path and journey, was there like a specific moment that made you reflect on all your experiences to utilize the initial principle of like, how do I give back to Australia? Was there like a specific moment that
there wasn't a specific
or it was just
moment.
it
was a constant evolution of experience, building up to understand. Okay, well, I've been this advisor. I've advised the minister or the PM or whoever it is, and I have some influence on the policy making and decision making.
Yeah,
but I'm not making the decision. Yeah, advisors shouldn't make.
Now it's time for me to put my hand up and.
Well, I think, you've got to have a bit of a confidence in yourself to a certain extent to think, okay, well, I have a vision about what I see for Australia.
Yeah.
I want to put my hand up to see if I can help implement that vision. And what is my vision for Australia? Like, I think what we have here is precious and special. I talked about how we have this kind of society that is multi-faith, multi-ethnic, and yet is relatively harmonious.
Mm-hmm.
We have high levels of quality of life for many Australians. We do have poverty. We do have disadvantage, both social and economic disadvantage. We need to keep working on that.
Yeah.
But we do have a bigger middle class, if you like, people who have opportunities. And the vast bulk of our communities can fulfill their potential or give the opportunity, right?
Yeah.
That's worth fighting for. It's worth protecting. It's worth improving upon. And whether it is in healthcare, like, we just announced $9 billion for Medicare to strengthen a universal healthcare system so people don't have to pay out of pocket for the GP. We've announced,
cheaper medicines, urgent care clinics,
which you need and you should have gone to. Got yourself seen straight away without having to pay, bulk billed.
Yeah.
It's bulk billed, so you wouldn't have to pay out of pocket. These are all things that lift the quality of life for the mass of people.
Mm-hmm.
And Labor does that. That's why I was sort of drawn to the Labor Party, because of the commitment to education, the investment in healthcare and Medicare, the investment in making a difference to people's lives.
Tangible things that lift them up.
Lifting people up, on climate change, for example, as well. The commitments we've made to renewable energy, the billions of dollars we've invested to get us to 82% renewable energy on the grid, the solar battery, all of the research, all of the investment. These are things that are lifting us up as a nation, if you like. So that's what drew me to politics. And you can make big contributions in lots of different sectors, absolutely. But I think in Parliament and in government is where you can make big changes to the direction of a nation, towards a vision of what we are as a people.
Yeah.
Now, we're going into a very complex, volatile period of time in the 21st century in the region. Things are not as stable as they were in the past.
Yeah.
We're having to step up and take responsibility as a nation for ensuring that we contribute to the stability, the security and the stability of our region, and the prosperity that comes from that.
On our region, do you think as Australia we're in a very unique position to be that topical bridge by words, anyway, bridge between the US and China in all of our region?
We have a very unique opportunity, Ethan. You've nailed it, right?
Yeah.
You're absolutely right about that.
We still have to grab it, but it's there. The
we have a
opportunity is
unique
there.
opportunity to play a role that is actually fundamentally consequential to the shape of the world that we're going to live in and our future generations are going to live in.
Yeah.
Okay. So Australia, Paul Keating once said, it was kind of a half joke that Australia's on the arse end of the world. I don't know if you ever heard that.
Yeah.
We're no longer.
I thought you were going to say the other quote, but yeah.
No, we're right at the Banana Republic. No, but we are right in the middle of the most important region, the Indo-Pacific region, for the 21st century. So what happens in the Indo-Pacific will make a huge difference to the way the globe, the way that humanity moves forward in the 21st century. And Australia, little old Australia, well, it's not that old, it's young Australia.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that we have the oldest continuing culture in the world.
Goes without saying, we understand.
65,000 years plus.
Yeah.
That combination that we have of the oldest culture in the world, that rich history, the young democratic part of who we are and the quality of life we have and the economic power that we have. I think we're the 11th largest economy in the world.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things combine to mean that Australia can play such a critical role in helping shape the region. And it is about trying to maintain and engender a kind of a stability for the region and a prosperity that people abide by rules.
Yeah.
Our trading partner is huge. In China, it's an important relationship, our security alliance with the US and our partnerships with Japan and South Korea and Indonesia and all the countries of Southeast Asia,
Yeah.
we can play a very positive role in bringing countries together through dialogue and diplomacy, development assistance for our Pacific partners to lift up that stability and that potential for prosperity. We have to do that.
We have to.
We're a trading nation. So we're not going to succeed by having a world in which countries can force their issues through the use of military force or violence. Our path to success is having countries abide by an international
through these diplomatic values and
international rules-based order where countries abide by the security framework and the trade framework because it's to our benefit.
Yeah, it's to everyone's benefit, really.
And that is our challenge in the region and globally. How we help shape that.
Yeah. On that globally, with getting getting the portfolio assistant defence minister.
Yeah.
What's it like getting up to speed or receiving that, or what's the changes? I was
reminded by my 10-year-old daughter of exactly where I sit in the firmament.
Yeah.
When I said on my first trip I went to a base in Perth, in Western Australia, Base Pearce, where they train our fighter pilot jets. I said, it was amazing to see that, and I got to go on the PM's plane and with the DPM, and when I came off the tarmac, all the military saluted us and saluted me, and she's like, "Why'd they do that?" And I said, because I got to salute the Minister for Defence. And she's like, "Settle down, Dad. You're just an assistant." So she put me in my box. But it is an
important role, though. It's not
and tremendous and privilege and an opportunity to do some really important work on behalf of my nation and my communities and for Australia. So I'm really excited by the opportunity. The role that I'll be playing is, obviously huge insofar as, we've got all of the estates, all the defence bases in Australia that I've got to work on helping secure and consolidate and make sure that's right. All the energy infrastructure on all these bases, the importance of that, all of the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief that I've been tasked with looking at as well.
Yeah.
These are all important areas. Obviously Australia, the ADF provides assistance where I was up in the flood zones in Taree, meeting with the mayor and the local MPs and helping with the community there with the ADF deployment. We do that in the Pacific as well with disaster management.
To our neighbours and everything.
Yeah, neighbours we support. So the ADF does – the men and women of the ADF do a lot of great work, and it's important to support them in that great work, defending Australia, defending our national interests and supporting communities.
Protecting Australia, defending whatever the threat is, whether it's, environmental or anything,
exactly,
really.
Disaster, whatever.
Yeah, they're important roles.
So really important roles. So it's an exciting opportunity and a privilege to do this job. Yeah.
So with that, what's the division of labour? So there's Richard Marles. He's probably got the brunt of it.
Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence. There's Pat Conroy, who's the Minister for Defence Industry, but he's also the Minister for Pacific Affairs and Development, like under the foreign policy. Yeah. So he works with Penny Wong. Matt Keogh is the Veterans Affairs Minister. I'm the Assistant Defence Minister. And then there's also Luke Gosling, who's the Special Envoy for Defence.
Yeah.
Well.
So what's some of the – it's not every day. You've still got your job of representing your electorate and all that.
Yeah.
So on those, what's the difference between responsibilities?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
In our Westminster system of Parliament, members of Parliament, you can't be a minister unless you're a member of Parliament, which means you have multiple jobs. Actually. So, representing your community, the electorate, as I was talking about earlier, serving that community, helping people with navigating NDIS or helping refugees and asylum seekers or helping people with the ATO or helping pensioners with Centrelink or students with whatever issues, supporting schools in my community, sporting clubs, community groups, charities,
just everything you can think of community-wise,
in your community.
Yeah.
It's a big job. It's a full-time job, and then you have the full-time job of being a minister as well.
That's what I'm curious about. Yeah.
So, mate,
how spread are you?
I'm trying to navigate this right now to figure out how to do this, and seeking advice from other ministers and others who've been in this role. But effectively, partly you got to work harder, which I find interesting because I've worked pretty hard already. But anyway, work harder, work smarter, be really disciplined and diligent in making sure that you're prioritising correctly and not getting sucked into one or two things and thing. Just make sure you
don't let
maintain
yourself get
focus.
too hyper-focused on one thing.
In one area, yeah.
Okay.
Maintain your focus. And you've got to really make sure of that.
Okay. Because so with these ministerial roles, it's not like you get to be a dictator over that topic or that category.
There's no dictators in our democracy.
I know that. No, I meant more like there is bureaucracy apparatuses that are always in operation in those departments, and then you come in and help advise on the Prime Minister's behalf, or what's that?
So,
what's the
how
process?
It works is each ministry has a department that they have that support them and provide. This is the public service, effectively, that provide that advice to the ministers. So our department is the Department of Defence. It's a large department, over 100,000 people, military and civilian. And they provide advice. There's policy advisors there and so on. They provide the advice to the ministers. The ministers are there to make the executive decisions and to push through the legislation that they want, to make the changes they want, or make the policy decisions that they make based on what we'd call frank and fearless advice of the public service.
Okay.
There are small staff of policy advisors within each minister's offices as well, who also work through some of these issues with a political lens on it as well. So the system works in a way that the advice is provided up to the minister or the ministers. It then goes to ministerial meetings or cabinet for approval if it's a big enough issue.
Yeah.
Where the PM and all the ministers sit and then they go through those submissions and so on from the departments and determine whether they're going to
what changes
those
or
recommendations or what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And obviously ministers can also instruct their departments that they wish to go down a particular path to do X, Y, or Z. So talking to my 10-year-old, I said, well, what could I do as a minister? I can instruct my department to ensure that every primary school in Australia gets a free Mars bars at every recess.
Yeah.
How much is that going to cost?
Yeah.
$200 million a year? So I'm going to get that through the treasurer, and I'm going to get that through the ministerial meetings and cabinet and so on. It's a silly example, but the point I'm making is it's not a silly example. Actually, the kids will love that. Is that you can go back and say we want to do this, and here's the reasons why we want to do it, because we want to improve children's teeth hygiene. And
with
they
Mars
might
bars.
come back. The department might come back and say, "Well, Minister, actually, this would have a very negative effect on the dental hygiene of children across Australia, and it would cost you even more in billions of dollars because of cavities and all the rest of it down the track. Maybe you shouldn't do this."
The dentist lobby is very happy with it.
Yeah, well, possibly. But let's switch to possibly having fruit provided at schools on an ongoing basis or something like that.
Yeah.
So in the defence sense, it's like, okay, we want to move towards doing this for defence.
Yeah.
We want to make sure we get the right kit.
For example, certain things that make ADF personnel readily available or engaged quick enough in the event of a natural disaster.
Yeah. So the National Defence Strategy, which we had one last year that was made public. There's a public version of that. Outlines and makes the assessment about our strategic circumstances and our needs. And what is required for the ADF to be ready, its readiness, its preparedness in order to do its job and protect Australia's national interests and defend Australia. And so that then goes to what capabilities it needs, what systems
what are the
it
shortfalls,
needs.
how do we bridge that?
Exactly, where the personnel issues and so on. And it's all based on a strategic analysis that, and I can tell you on the NDS, on the National Defence Strategy, it's all about a strategy of denial and deterrence. And what we mean by deterrence is deterring other adversaries or others from using violence or force to reach their objectives. So we want to avoid conflict. So in other words, you're investing in defence and in defence capabilities that will deter others from engaging in military exercises or military might to reach their objectives. You're trying to bring countries back to the negotiating table on diplomacy and dialogue. This is a really important point, Ethan, because people think, you're investing all this money in defence, it's because you just want to go to war. No, it's the opposite.
Yeah, I was curious about
investing in peace.
Because there's that misconception or that understanding of it's an arms race. So if I get more, they get more, I get more. So what is it?
So it's the investment in capability is a capability that will deter others. Will the calculus, the cost, they'll see it as too high. So if they think, you know what, I'm going to invade, let's just say country X, we want to invade New Zealand. They're pretty easy. Like just let's go and get them. All right. Yeah. Okay.
Just sail down there. I'll build a boat. Let's go.
Let's go. Your capability as a defence force should be high enough to deter them from taking that decision because the cost will be too high. In other words, damn, we can't invade New Zealand because both the Australian and New Zealand Defence Forces have all these capabilities that will cost it, make it too hard for us, and it will hurt us.
Yeah.
And it'll cost
It'll be a net loss for both.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or a net loss for them. So they don't go down that path of reaching an objective. Not to say there's any country that wants to invade New Zealand, but that would be the way that you describe a deterrent effect. And the deterrent effect is also collective deterrence. So countries working together to deter others from trying to...
Hence the network of all these agreements, defence agreements.
Alliances and partnerships and so on. Because those countries want to see a world in which there is peace, prosperity, and for that to be the case, you need to have stability and security in the region. So the laws of the sea should be abided by because that's important for trade.
Yeah.
You can't just allow anyone just to board a ship and do whatever they want. You've got to abide by, by the laws of the sea so the trade can be free and flowing and open. And that's the kind of basis of deterrence and investing in deterrence. You invest in defence capabilities, whether it's Air Force or Navy or Army or whatever it is, or planes or whatever, because then it's quite clear that you have a position of strength.
Yep.
You're defending that prosperity, that trade, all of that kind of stuff.
We can hold our own sort of thing.
And countries don't think that they can get away with, ramming a boat and taking whatever and pushing fishermen out, whatever it might be. Just as a sort of an interesting stat, people then have all this argument about, what are we spending as a percentage of GDP? 2%, 3%, whatever it is. The real point here is how you spend that money and what you spend it on. And any investment that you do in peacetime is a good investment in ensuring you don't go to conflict or war. Because if you're in a war situation, you're spending a hell of a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in Australia, in World War II, have a guess as a percentage of GDP what we were spending.
Wasn't it like 70-something%?
It was 38%.
All right, it was a bit high. All right. Opposite of that.
Very high. But Ukraine, for example, which is in the middle of a war, is spending 30, 40% of its GDP on weapons, on fighting.
Yeah.
Right? So you don't want to have that situation. You want to avoid that situation.
Because then that ripples out and cuts a lot of other benefits that the government would provide.
Well, it's got to come from somewhere. So education, healthcare, all this kind of stuff. So it's about investing to avoid conflict.
Yeah.
Is the defence spending question. And then, as the PM has said, and the Deputy PM, it's spending on capability that we need to meet our preparedness and our deterrent objectives.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to
hope that explains it.
Well, I just wanted to clear something, like have a better understanding of it.
Yeah.
I guess we're probably rounding the end of it up. I guess we'll go do a last question. I'll let you go. You're a busy man. You've got a million jobs.
Is this a quiz question? You know how you do a short, quick fire quiz?
Maybe to an extent, if you want to answer it like that, sure.
Yes, no answer.
If you could go back to the moment you first considered entering politics, what one piece of advice would you give yourself and why?
That's a great question. So I'm going back in time.
As far back as you need to, or little Peter just went, hey, mate, how you doing?
Oh, when I was considering going to politics?
Just whenever you think is relevant and when you should give yourself certain advice that you've learnt now that you didn't have then.
I would tell myself to actually take my time more and enjoy the moments that you're in where you do something well rather than just moving on to the next thing straight away. That's what I tell myself.
What's an example of that? What would...
I mean, there's a lot of examples where you get stuff done and it's just like, oh, that's great. You've done this amazing thing. Like we helped an elderly couple recover their life savings that got lost through this bureaucratic nightmare with the state trustees and so on. And I had to do a fair bit of work going to the Victorian Treasurer's office and the Treasurer and then them and just disentangle what had been a problem for them. They went overseas and they gave power of attorney to their daughter, and then they stuffed it up, and then they lost the money on it because they moved houses. Anyway, point is, we recovered it for them, and they were super grateful, and it was amazing, and they made me a cup of tea and stuff. And then I just moved on to the next thing, and I thought, we should probably stop and think, hey, you really changed people's lives in a positive way, and just savor that for a moment. Yeah, that sounds a bit strange, but it's like I'm constantly on the move and constantly doing stuff. So maybe it's important to just sit back and think, appreciate you're helping people. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Give yourself a little bit of kindness to yourself.
Yeah. Appreciate the wins and have an extra biscuit with the tea.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Don't rush off to the next thing straight away.
All right. No, thank you. All right. Thank you, Peter, for your time.
Thanks, Ethan.
Yeah. All right. Cut, I guess.